and is herself a member of the board of directors of San Francisco's Zen Center. Dr. Damon is going to talk to us today on life in death, caring for persons with AIDS as a Buddhist, as a physician, and as a mother. Dr. Damon.
Good morning. Can you hear me back there? That's all right. It's wonderful to be here. This is just a terrific conference, and the organizers have done a superb job, including this. I love this ritual that you all have. What I'd like to talk to you today about is life and death, the life in death. I'm a physician, as Roger said, and I've taken care of AIDS patients in San Francisco for the last 6 years. I'm also a Buddhist. I live at Green Gulch Farm, which is a Soto Zen temple founded by Suzuki Roshi. Green Gulch itself has been involved in the Living and Dying enterprise, both through the hospice volunteer program that it began about 7 years ago, and through caring for its residents themselves who are infected with HIV, with the HIV virus. I'm telling you all of this because the context in which I work and live obviously colors what I'll say today. The topic of today is facing death in Japan culture. Now I know absolutely, well no, that's not true. Thank you very much. I've learned something this morning. What I do know something about is facing death in San Francisco, in America, using the AIDS epidemic as the aperture. And I want to talk about that. I especially want to welcome all of you hospice volunteers. The work that you're doing is really critical in this whole enterprise. I'm sorry that my slides don't work, because some of this would be easier and we could follow along together, but so be it for technology. Some thoughts on death, and these are just various thoughts that my patients have said over the years. For 54 years, I put stars in the sky. Now I leap through it all. What a shattering. Now, he wasn't my patient. That's Dogen. I could think very clearly, even though I was considered dead. This is one of my patients who had a near-death experience and came back. Death, avoid it at all costs. One of Suzuki Roshi's longest disciples. And the last, I thought I was going to die today. But you know, I'm going to be dead for a long, long time, so I've decided not to rush it. This was a patient of mine who went on to live for several more months. Over the past 5 years, we've cared for about 550 patients who have died. Their average age is 40. They come from all ethnic backgrounds, all lifestyle backgrounds. Some have been homeless. Some are upper middle class housewives, some are gay, some are straight. What they've shared is a singular desire to put death off as long as possible. Now AIDS, I'm going to give you a mini AIDS 101 course because as a physician I can't not do it, so bear with me. Okay. AIDS is a peculiar disease for us in that we're able to treat everything about it that kills people without changing the fact that it kills people. Let me clarify that. AIDS is caused, I'm sure as many of you know, by the human immunodeficiency virus. The body is infected through that virus through contact with blood, semen, vaginal secretions primarily. Now, HIV virus attacks the immune system. The purpose of the immune system, as I'm sure some of you know, is to protect the body. It's the body's army, defense army, if you will. And it's got various parts to it, and these parts of the immune system are in superb intercommunication with one another. It's very brilliant and very sophisticated. Now, the HIV virus attacks part of the immune system that's called the T cell, or the CD4 cell system. And I'm saying this only so you have some familiarity with the language of AIDS and the language of this don't try to remember it. In any case, the T cell system itself is set up by the body to protect the body against viruses, against slow-growing bacteria like tuberculosis, against fungal infections like cryptococcal meningitis, and against viruses like HIV. HIV virus is a parasite, as are most all viruses. And what that means is that it can't live by itself. It has to have a host. It has to go into a cell, take some of the material of that cell so that it can reproduce. So what the HIV virus does is it enters the T cell system, which is the exact part of the immune system that's supposed to kill it. And it sits inside of those T cells, kind of like a Trojan horse situation, and it hangs out. It's perfectly hidden from our own surveillance system. Not only that, but for example, if you get a cold or you immunize your kids, that turns on the immune system in the body. And every time the immune system gets turned on, the HIV virus replicates. So it also goes hand in hand synergistically with how effective our immune system is. Over the course of years, the T cell system starts to get depleted, and as it gets depleted, those diseases that it's designed to protect us from start to take over the body, and someone dies. The average person has about 1,000 T cells at any moment in time, and we say over the course of the disease, you lose about 100 T cells a year, so that by about year 8 of the disease, after infection by the virus, you begin to develop diseases that we think of as AIDS. Now, AIDS comes about, and it's just, this is all language, but we say that somebody has AIDS when their T cells are under 200, or when they've gotten one of these diseases that we've come to define as AIDS-related, like pneumocystis carinii pneumonia, like Kaposi sarcoma, like CMV retinitis. Most of us in this room have some form of pneumocystis in our bodies. It doesn't hurt us. It doesn't hurt us because our own immune systems are wiping it out. They're controlling the situation. It does hurt somebody who's HIV infected who has no T cells to take care of the problem. Since the AIDS epidemic began or was identified roughly 13 years ago, from my perspective anyway, the only real headway that medicine has made is in dealing with the specific, what are called opportunistic diseases that people get, like pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. We've gotten much more sophisticated in treating that problem than we were, let's say, when I was a medical student 8 years ago. When I was a medical student, if somebody got pneumocystis, we never put them in the intensive care unit. We never put them on ventilators. We didn't give them that option. And we didn't because our thinking, our common thinking, was that they wouldn't do well and that they die, so why bother? Why put them through that pain? And I'd like to read you a quote by an African bushman. "Love is ill. I go to the bush to fetch her medicine. I meet some fearful thing on the way. A bad spirit snatches the medicine from my hands. Truly, Mon, death gives no warning." When I was an intern, I'd been on call all night, and I decided to run in the Beta Breakers. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of this race, but it's a race from one side of San Francisco to the other. It's 7.7 miles. And I don't know why I decided to run the race, but I did. In any case, at about mile 2, there's this long hill that you have to climb up. And I was in a crowd of 80,000 people, and I wanted out in the worst way possible. But I was in the exact middle of the crowd with nowhere to go. And this really sweet man who was running beside me said, just breathe, come with me. And he escorted me through to the end of the race. 3 days later, I was on call again, and that same sweet man was in the emergency room, breathing really hard. He had pneumocystis carinii pneumonia. And he died exactly 1 week after he'd taken me through this race. Truly, Mon, death gives no warning. That wouldn't happen today. Last week, right before I got on the airplane, I admitted somebody to our unit who had had pneumocystis 4 times. He'd been on the ventilator 3 times. once for a month. And actually, after that episode, he'd gone back to his law practice. He practiced law for, I think, a year before getting sick again. People say of America, and I think it's true, that it's a culture that avoids death at all costs. We work with people who have a disease that spares absolutely no one, and we're working with the end stage of that disease. When I graduated from medical school, we took what now I think of as kind of a bizarre oath. It certainly touches on a lot of the issues that are being raised in this conference. But here are some of the words. Most especially must I tread with care in matters of life and death. If it is given to me to save a life, all thanks, but it may also be within my power to take a life. This awesome responsibility must be faced with great humbleness and awareness of my own frailty. Above all, I must not play at God. My partner and I have come to view the work that we do with people as helping them to turn a corner. We try to contain the ambiguity that's created by this virus. Is somebody living or are they dying? Where are they in their disease process? And by trying to provide the container for ambiguity, let them move and turn their own corner out of Western interventive medicine toward palliative care, if you will. We have a 23-bed unit that's in what's called a long-term nursing facility. I'm sure you have them here, kind of a chronic care facility. That facility is 1,200 beds, which makes it huge. It was set up, it's kind of an interesting background, it was set up as a home for the poor, primarily poor men at the turn of the century, and it's where everybody who was what would now be homeless was housed. And of course, pretty soon they developed medical problems, so a medical component came in, and ultimately it turned into a long care facility. When our ward was open about 6 years ago, we were set up to take care of people who either couldn't go home because they were too sick, had no family to support them, needed some rehabilitation, and perhaps they were going to live longer, more productively. Perhaps they were going to be able to go home. But primarily we were set up for economic reasons, and that was to take the pressure off of the acute care beds at San Francisco General Hospital. San Francisco is really where AIDS care in the United States originated. At this point, most of our patients, let me see if I can, we've taken care of about 600 patients. They come in, the average length of stay is 20 days. It's a very short time. Of those people who come in, 70% die on the unit. But when they come to us, only 40% say, I'm coming here because I know that I've got nowhere else to go in life. 10% come to us wanting everything done, everything imaginable done. And we discharge about 20%. We discharge them home. The real problem is that we have no idea when somebody comes in. They're all end stage. They have no T cells. They've been sick with everything. But still, we have no idea where somebody fits. We may know that 20% are going to leave, but I don't know whether that means that you, Lekshay, are going to leave the hospital. I don't know who is actually going to be in that 20%. Because each patient or each client very much has his or her own trajectory, and that trajectory is caused by some of the complexity of the disease, by family, by will, by personality, and certainly by us. We're a factor in all of that. I'd like to talk briefly about one of my favorite people. Her name, and each patient obviously has a story, so I'm going to tell one story. Margaret was a really wonderful woman, mother of 4 children, about 40 years old, I think, when we first started taking care of her. She'd been an IV drug abuser. She had absolutely no idea about AIDS. She just had ended up in the hospital one day with a brain infection, and she was very thin, very confused, very ill. That same infection was also affecting her blood system. She couldn't clot blood. And the day, but up until the time that she was sent to us, her family had wanted everything done. She'd been in the intensive care unit, I think, for 2 months. And then the day that she came to us, her medical team at San Francisco General said, you know, we've not been effective in getting her body to start making red blood cells. She's going to die. There's nothing that can be done. We're sending her to you for hospice care. Take good care of her. But nonetheless, here's a person sitting in front of me. And as I was admitting her, I was saying, and she was very lucid and walking around. She did only weigh 72 pounds when I admitted her. And I said, Margaret, what is it that you want done? And she said, oh, I'd like a cigarette. So we had a cigarette. I'd like a cup of coffee. Gave her a cup of coffee. But then she developed a nosebleed. And I couldn't do anything to stop it. And I kept trying to stop it. And interspersed, I was getting really agitated. I mean, I could just feel. And I said, you know, Margaret, these are the choices. You can stay here. I can make you comfortable. And you're going to die within 2 hours. Are you ready for that? And she couldn't really answer the question. And I said, or I can send you back to the acute care hospital because you need some platelets and that will help you stop bleeding. And maybe you're going to survive another couple of days. And she say, I don't want to go back to the acute care hospital. And finally I said, have you worked out any details for the care of your children? And she said no. And with that, I sent her back to the hospital. Because I personally couldn't let, I mean, this was me personally, just wasn't ready to let this person I didn't know die. So we arranged to have, she came back the next day, nothing, you know, her red blood cell count was not compatible with life, really. And we arranged a family meeting with her children, all of the social workers, everybody who had ever dealt with this family, and that was a lot of people, to kind of work out the details about the care of her children. And I assumed, and everybody assumed, that she would die within 24 hours. And her mother came up to me at the end of the family meeting and said, you know, Dr. Grace, Margaret's not going to die. And I sort of looked at her and I said, well, how do you know that? And she said, because I'm going to give her green tea. And I said, and what does green tea have to do with whether she lives or dies? And she said, I've had cancer 3 times, and I drink green tea. So I said, great. And she brought in the green tea. She gave it to Margaret, and Margaret went on to live a 1.5 years longer. And every other patient on our ward went on green tea. I'd like to say one word here about sort of the complexity of hospice-level care versus intense medical intervention, because this is one of the issues that the AIDS epidemic has pushed, certainly in the United States. The gay male population in San Francisco is incredibly sophisticated, both medically and economically. They know more about their diseases than I ever do and will. They are up on the latest research. They are plugged into the NIH, National Institute of Health, with their mini computers by the bedside, and they can tell me what is happening in Sweden, what's happening in Australia. They know how to use medical care. They know how to use me, and I just put myself at their service, and I say, let me know what you want. Let me know what you want. That's not true of the IV drug abusing population. That's not true of the black population. That's not true of the Hispanic population or even the Asian population. And in part, I think it's because those populations, at least on the mainland, have been very disenfranchised medically. So if I say to somebody, listen, how do you feel about code status? How do you feel about going to the intensive care unit? To limit medical care in any way for them is the same as receiving no medical care. And that's just something to keep in mind. And I think it's a very important part of looking at the multicultural approach to death, that it very much is tied in with medicine and people's access to quality care. Andrew Solomon wrote a really wonderful recent article, which you should read, in the New Yorker on euthanasia. And he raised this question very well. He said, How people die is the least of it. When people die is the question from which religion springs. I'm sorry, why people die is the question from which religion springs. But when people die, that's the question over which we're beginning to have dominion. And that's very heady business. And I certainly see that as a physician. I think I've gotten more and more quiet as the years go on because I realize how much the timing of death is really a question of language. If I go to a family and I say, your son is very ill, your daughter is very ill, do you want me to do everything possible? They'll say yes. If I go to that same family and say, do you want me to let nature take its course? They also will say yes. The outcome is very, very different. So I'm trying to learn, and I'm learning to be careful with language, or else the timing of death ends up resting in my hands. Not the fact of death, but the timing of death. And part of this medical sophistication makes it really difficult for families as well as patients, because I know families will say to me, how long, they'll sort of say quietly out in the hall, how long does my brother and my son have? And I'll say, you know, I really don't know. I can tell you always within 24 to 48 hours of death, but when that 24-hour period is going to come, I have no idea. And again, it's because of this complex interplay between will, spirit, whatever that might be, medical technology, whatever that is in a given moment, and this virus itself. It's very unpredictable. I think what it's made me appreciate, this sort of moment-to-momentness of living and dying, is the whole issue of preparation for death. And I think people need time to prepare to die. They need to decide how to do it in their own way, if not when to do it. And that's what this kind of moment-to-moment interplay gives. Isan Dorsey, I don't know if any of you have read this book called Street Zen, but Isan Dorsey was an IV drug abuser, a gay male. He was a female impersonator. He was also the abbot of Hartford Street Zen Center once he became a Zen monk. And Hartford Street Zen Center in San Francisco started one of the first hospices for AIDS patients in the United States. In any case, shortly before his death, he was infected with the HIV virus. He was interviewed by the New Yorker magazine, and he was sewing on his robes, or actually he was sewing on the robes of the next person who was going to take the Mount Seat ceremony to take his place when he died. And the interviewer said, well, so Isan, how are you preparing for your own death? And he said, I'm sitting here, I'm talking to you, and I'm sewing on my robes. But how people prepare for death, in my experience, has a great deal to do with their culture, their attitudes towards death, their own spirituality, their family background, their thinking process generally, and their ability to think, because many of my patients are demented, and so it's quite complex to look at preparation for death. In preparation, my preparation for giving this talk, I asked my lone Japanese gay male patient, what can you tell me about preparing for death in Japan? And it was fascinating because I'd known that when he came to us, he tried to commit suicide. And I'd assumed from the medical record, because he's been seen by every psychiatric service in the city, that he'd been severely depressed, that it had been the result of depression. But as I was talking to him, and this gets back to the earlier conversation this morning, what became really clear was that he tried to commit death because, in his words, commit suicide, because committing suicide in Japan was an honorable way to die, certainly relative to how much honor was not attached to dying of AIDS. And he said, you know, what I've learned in this experience, I tried 3 times to kill myself, to have an honorable death, and I was not successful. And what he said to me is, I'm coming to realize how hard it is to die, and actually I'm getting scared. He actually was getting scared. And I think this is one of those powerful lessons that those of us who work intimately with AIDS patients see, which many people don't see, and that is how difficult it really is to die. And I don't mean the act of dying itself, but Camus said this in The Myth of Sisyphus. The body has its knowledge, the mind has its knowledge. The task of the body, or the message from the body, is it shrinks from annihilation, whereas the mind may be able to let go. And we see this a lot. And I think that it's this physical clinging to life that certainly makes our unit the special place it is. It's very noisy. All people are together. We have children there. We have a pig on our ward. We have many cats on our ward. You know, it's sort of it's a magnet for every wild or semi-wild animal, you know, in the greater San Francisco area, because none of the windows close. We actually do have a pig on our ward. And, you know, we have medical rounds for the animals as we do for the patients. And we have children who visit, not who live on the ward. But at one point, you know, we're always having visitors because it's one of these model units, and the noise level is deafening. It's just deafening. And at one point, we're very collective in how we make decisions, but at one point, some of us decided not to be collective. And we decided to try to institute a quiet hour in the afternoon, kind of like we had in school as children, you know, cookies time. And there was an immediate rebellion, just total rebellion. Then I got this idea, how about some nice classical music between the hours of 2 and 3? Poison pen letters, too funereal, they all said. So then I said, okay, you guys decide, you women decide, what kind of music do you want? So now between the hours of 2 and 3, we have reggae bands, mariachi bands, heavy metal, rap music. And again, it's a lot because this population is young. Their average age is 40. Some are between 13 and 20. They're young. They're dying, but they're very much living each moment before they die. And in some ways, their living is their preparation for dying, and that's so clear. We have, and I can't remember the word, it's yakushu. We have yakushu rituals, or like yakushu rituals on our ward. Somebody will say, today I want to have my funeral. You know, and basically what that means is that we stand up and we have a circle of appreciation for that person. We play the music they want. We cook a cake. You know, we really do it. We have a party. They decide who they want to invite. And it's really wonderful. It's a way of them feeling appreciated, feeling accepted. Oh, in one of these cases, we have a number of transvestites who are cross-dressing people and who have been tremendously ostracized in our culture. And for one of these pre-death rituals, what this person wanted to do was to have his hair done, so we called it a beauty salon. We painted his nails. We found a beautiful dress. And, you know, she paraded down the aisle between the beds, and it was sort of a wonderful wedding ceremony for herself, was how she described it. She died 15 hours after that, but she was able to walk down, and she gave cake to every other patient. So I think we do have rituals. Sometimes they're spontaneous. We had one person on our unit whose name was Cosmic Lady, and she's a very well-known street person in San Francisco. She used to describe herself to anybody who cared to listen as a missionary from intergalactic casting. And as we were walking around in the morning, she would hand out these 3x5 index cards that were beautifully psychedelic, and we'd stand in line for them. And they'd say things like, the rent is up on the planet. She was preparing for death. I think that those of us who work with dying patients are very much part of their preparation for death. And burnout is an issue that strikes everybody. And burnout, unfortunately, really affects the people that we're relating to. And I know at one point when I felt terribly burnt out, I went to Tassajara, which is our monastery at Greenbelt, and I was sitting sesshin, And at that point, at that day 3 to 4, when everything is screeching, for those of you who've ever sat as a sheen, I sort of saw this endless parade of, at that point, maybe 250 people I cared for. It was just endless. And my body was kind of racked with pain. I mean, I was really miserable, but I came out of that experience feeling like just as their bodies are clinging to life, it's part of the reality of human existence that we will be touched and touched deeply by their death and by their life. Because if you care for people who are dying, you come to love them. If you love people and they leave, it hurts. And you have to feel the hurt. You have to have the hurt leave your body in order to continue doing this work. Suzuki Roshi, whom I adore, the founder of our temple, said at one point, for me it really is in the just sitting that I continue to do this work, and I know that it's true for the entire staff that I work with. Everybody has some kind of spiritual practice. It doesn't matter what the discipline is, but some way just to learn to be able to sit in the middle of this. Suzuki Roshi said, when we sit in the cross-legged posture, we resume our fundamental activity of creation. When we sit, we are nothing. We do not even realize what we are, we just sit. But when we stand up, we're there. This is the first step in creation. When you are there, everything else is there. When we emerge from nothing, when everything emerges from nothing, we see it all as fresh new creation. This is non-attachment. And I take this as my antidote to the part of me that clings, because there will always be a part of me that clings. How many of you here are Buddhists? I mean, I don't mean to get you identified. And how many of you have watched somebody die intimately? As Buddhists, we take vows repeatedly to save all sentient beings. And one of the ways that that's interpreted in my Sangha is that we make a commitment to walk with one another through birth and death. One Saturday, a couple of years ago, I was sitting and having tea, and I got a call from a friend who said, would you be willing to raise a child in need? And I said, well, let me talk to my partner. Let me talk to my partner. And I talked to my partner, and she said, well, let's go meet the baby. This was a newborn. And I kind of rolled my eyes, because you know what newborns look like. I mean, who in their right mind has it in them to say no to a newborn? So the decision was obviously already made. And I said, we may as well check with the community, because if we're going to walk through birth and death with this little person, they're going to be walking with us through birth and death. And 3 days later, totally unprepared, completely flabbergasted, we brought home this tiny, tiny baby that weighed about 4 pounds. Amazed that anybody, that life itself would entrust her to our care. She's now 2 years old. She had her second birthday 2 days ago. And the cast of people she's HIV infected, she was drug addicted, but the cast of people who are supporting her life for this party was somewhere over 170. She's completely oblivious to it. She just is living her life. But every now and then I understand that other people see it differently. For other people, she's a tragedy. She was born drug addicted, she was abused, she was sort of disavowed by her parents, she's infected with an HIV virus. None of this was her fault. What's the karma in this? Is there even any reason to speak of karma? Now Sabrina is just a happy kid, and unfortunately I wish the slide projector worked, because that's what you see of her. She's a laughing, smiling kid. And for us who live close to her, who actually change her diapers, help her walk, follow her life breath by breath, that's all it is. She's life. She's life. Someday our hearts may break, but for now it's really changing diapers. There's a wonderful Japanese movie about the tea master Rikyū, and there's one shot in the movie when he's preparing for a formal tea, and he goes through his garden and he cuts down all of the flowers, leaving a single flower for the eye of the guest to focus on while the guest is approaching the tea room. The cut stalks are apparent, so is the flower. What do you see? The AIDS epidemic in many ways has changed how American culture looks at death because it's the leading cause of death among young men in America and probably will also be the leading cause of death among young women in America very soon. It used to be acts of violence, and those deaths were often very swift. The death caused by AIDS is relatively long. Most people know for many years that they probably will die. And it's characterized by periods of normalcy, deterioration, return to normal. And there's a lot of choice in it. Choice as to how to deal with the disease, choice about when to die, not choice about the fact of death. And it's been very transforming for a number of the people I've worked with, and I'm not trying to just look at the brighter side, but they've said, it's something about the time course in which they're living with this experience. They've said, you know, it's taking my life, but it's also given me my life. And by that, I take it to mean that they've come to appreciate and understand something about seeing that single flower and the beheaded stalks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Grace, for a comfortable and a powerful image of her work in San Francisco. Before we move to open discussion, where for sure somebody's going to ask her, why is there a pig in the ward? We have two respondents. The first is Tsuneyoshi Miyashiro from St. Francis Hospice and a Project Dana volunteer. Tsuneyoshi.
Thank you very much. I wish that Dr. Denman would have stayed a little longer. I have to do it myself. As you can see that I'm a bit nervous this morning. But anyway, thank you all for being here. I have been a Project Dana volunteer for about four years maybe. My last two patients were one with Alzheimer's disease and the other with Parkinson's. But just recently they have been placed in home care. So I have no one to see. But I still continue to go to the person that has Alzheimer's disease to do the yard work. So that keeps me occupied. As far as hospice is concerned, I've been there for 12 years, but I cannot say anything about it because Dr. Walker has been doing it for 37 years, and he has seen about 700 somewhat patients die. Well, I've seen about a couple of hundred die, but it's been only 12 years, so I have a lot of catch up to do. So, okay, congratulations. I see him come to hospice now and then, but he walks so fast that I have no time to stop him and chat with him. I guess he's going to the next patient, I guess, but he's still in a hurry. But let me tell you two instances where I have quite remembered what the reactions were with a patient that I have seen. I have seen a 2-year-old boy with leukemia, a 9-year-old boy. Some of them are young, not only with elderly cancer. But there was a 34-year-old young girl. She had cancer of the bone, it has metastasized. And she had so much pain that even the painkiller couldn't help her. She would feel the spasm come from the back of her head. She could feel it coming. It was all the way down to her feet. And she would just stretch and just expecting it to come. And she would say, "I'll wait." That's all she could say, "I'll wait." There's so much pain. No painkiller could help her. But I was happy to be there because I do reflexology. And I could touch her feet and massage her leg. From the knee down, that's where I massage. And she always waited for me to come. I visited there about 3 or 4 days a week. And she would wait for my arrival. But it was nice to help her in my way. Sometimes I used to receive a call from the nurse's station that she's asking for me at 11 o'clock in the evening. So a couple of occasions I went to see her and massage her feet. This is one of the lasting memories that I have of a patient like her. She was very brave. She never complained. And about a man I've been seeing recently, he has cancer of the tracheotomy, not tracheotomy, but the esophagus. So doctors did 2 surgeries on the side of the neck and inserted a tracheotomy. That's where they breathe because the throat is already spread with cancer, so it's affecting her his throat. And then just lately they had did surgery on his tongue. So you know what that means, they cut off part of the tongue. So he cannot breathe through his mouth, so he cannot swallow. And so when I first visited him, he had saliva coming out from his mouth. It comes out automatically. And then he coughs through the tracheotomy. There's a tube that comes out from the neck, going into his windpipe. So those are the things that I experienced with some of the hospice patients. But I'd like to go back about 45 years of my life, which I think conditioned me, prepared me for these situations. So I met Siddhartha when he was young, before he became a Buddha. He was a very curious person. He wanted to know what was going on outside of the palace where he lived. His father, King Suddhodana, and mother, Queen Maya, they waited 20 years before, his arrival, before they have any children, as you know. So when he was born, he was a precious child, so they wanted to keep him, within the palace gate so that he wouldn't see outside what was going on. They didn't want him to see people dying or getting sick. So one day when he was about 29, he decided to go out of the palace gate to see what was going on. So he asked his servant Janna to, get contact of his horse, his white horse. And then he went out to see what was really going on outside of the palace gate. He saw people get sick, and people that are dying. He saw funeral procession. So this was something that was actually taking place. Many of you might not be able to see some of the gruesome sights. So when you go to the hospital, some people are very afraid to touch the patient. But this is really what is going on today. They're dying every moment. So after Siddhartha left the palace and he became monk, and when he became the Buddha, he taught me something about life. After he discovered the truth of life, he became my good friend as I read his book. Actually, he transformed my life. He taught me about karma, Four Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path. Taught me about interdependence, interrelationship. Those are very simple things which I am able to understand. And I haven't been to college, but just a lowly person that understood what he meant by causation. So he sort of made the foundation and the groundwork for me at that time. Then came Shinran Shoni, who was the most humble person and most honest person, talking about the Menbutsu way of life. He taught me about Amida would accept me just as I am. Because in Jodo Shinshu, there is no calculation or contrivance or even setting a goal. There is no reason for complacency or inactivity. And because we have been driven, like I was being driven to be what I am, we are constantly on the move. Because life is movement. It is a ceaseless movement. When we come to a bridge, we don't build a house. We continue to move on our journey. As the Reverend Yoshiaki Fujitani had mentioned in one of his sermons, he said we immerse ourselves in the Nembutsu and let it be a natural process. And we begin to saturate ourselves into it. When I say saturate, we don't just immerse and get saturated right away up to our neck. That's the answer. We have to continue moving on through our journey. Because it takes time. It depends on how we listen, how much we read, how much we try to learn, how much experience we have with others. And the dying, if you would like to include that also. So taking this in mind, I have only gratitude for my masters, for my spiritual teachers. So every morning I exercise. That keeps me healthy. I wake up on 4 in the morning and I jog for about 7 to 10 miles. After I finish, I take a bath, shower, then I rest for a while, and then I go in front of the altar to chant sutras. So I owe something to my teachers, my spiritual teachers. It's not only Shinran or Buddha, but think of Nagarjuna, Vasubandhu, Nanduan, all the different masters, Genshin, Honen. So, Nembutsu is only gratitude. That's all. There is no contrivance. Just live each day. So, when I light the candle, that is Amida to me. And the incense is my life. My life burning away. It always reminds me of my life. So I also recite the poem every morning and evening. I have 3 poems, but the one that I like best is entitled Beginning Today. Morning and night I recite this poem. I will begin this day anew with the thought of becoming the person I'd like to be. If not completing a difficult journey today, at least getting a little further along the way. Today I will set aside some time just for me to plan, to dream, to be honest with myself about myself, to be better acquainted with this person that I am and this place that I call home. Today I will experience something new. I will learn from the world around me, the words I read, the sounds I hear, the touches I feel, the faces I see. Even through the course of my daily tasks, I will lean toward understanding and make this commonplace a wondrous place to be. So once again, I'd like to go back to the hospice and tell you a story about my most cherished experience with this patient. This patient was about 50 years old, a woman who came from Japan with her husband to live in California and then transferred to Hawaii. She had a 24-year-old daughter, and she was a single parent when she got sick. I used to visit her nearly every day for the last 3 weeks before she died. We became very good friends. And incidentally, she spoke fluent English, so we could communicate easily. She had cancer of the colon, but she still smoked cigarettes when she came to the hospice. And I used to hint her, to stop smoking. Why do you still smoke? First time was okay. She just listened to me. The second time I, mentioned this again. It's not good for your health. Stop lecturing me. My cancer is not in my lungs; it's in my colon. So I didn't say any more after that. Anyway, I should take her food now and then. She still enjoy whatever. She loved fruits, so I used to take fruits to her. But anyway, after a few weeks of seeing her, when I knew that her time was near, I went early in the morning to see her. It was about 7:30 in the morning. Her eyes were closed. She was facing the ceiling. Spoke to her, but there was no response. So I kept talking to her. That hospice, even their eyes are closed, in the last moment of their life, they can hear you. They can hear you. I'm sure they understand also. So I kept talking to her, massage her feet, got a damp towel, wipe her face, her neck, and her arms and hands. So about 11:30, I spoke to her and told her that I was going, leave her, and then, because I had to pick up my wife, to come here and take her home. So she was still looking up to the ceiling with her eyes closed. And as I was walking out towards the door, I looked back once more to look at her. But this was the last time I'm going to see her before she dies. So as I reached the door, I turned and looked at her. And then, her head was turned towards the door where I was when I was leaving. So I rushed back to her and I held her hands, and she told me, "Arigato." She whispered, "Arigato." So I said, "Sayonara." really touched me. And, she did turn her head. Then when I took my wife home, and about 3:30 in the afternoon, I received a call from the nurse's station and they informed me that she had just passed away. But that's one of the most touching experience that I had with a patient at hospice. But one day, a co-worker informed me, just I reached the hospice center. She told me that a certain patient died, just died, so why don't you see that patient? I said, okay. And she told me how she looked. And she was so peaceful and beautiful. And she suddenly asked me, are you sorry? Are you afraid to die? I'm not. She said, well, I thought for a moment, I said, well, I really don't know until that time comes. I don't know. So I will continue to listen to the world around me, the words that I read, the sounds I hear, the touches I feel, the faces I see. I'm still on my journey, so thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Tsunayoshi, another very important member of our community. And it must be the case that jogging gets easier as you get older. I'm up to about 3.5 miles now and anticipate improving upon that. Our next respondent this morning is the Reverend Myokan Shakti Tan, who is a Soto Zen priest and a social worker with Hospice Hawaii.
Good morning, and I think it still is morning. I first came to Hawaii in 1981. I was on my way to Japan, and I made a couple of telephone calls to see if there would be any possibility of my negotiating an opportunity to service the population here in Hawaii as a Buddhist priest. At that time, I was told that I wouldn't live long enough to see that happen. It has been the tradition for the most part for the Soto to bring our priests from Japan. And so on my way back from Japan, I stopped and thought, well, maybe if I met a few people, they might change their mind. But the time was right, but the people were not ready quite then. So because of that, I went back to California, and at that point, I decided I needed to go to work. And I was in San Francisco, and I looked in the paper, and there was this job called under sales for Eureka Fluid Works. So I had no idea what that would be, and I called them up, and I said, I'm interested in applying for your position. And they asked me if I was a good salesperson, and I said it depended on whether or not I believed in the product. So they sent me to the Post Street mortuary because it was embalming fluid. Well, because of this, I had made the appointment, but when I arrived at the mortuary school, the person with whom I was supposed to speak had run into a serious problem. It's the person who was supposed to be teaching that class with the cadavers
had not shown up, and so he was forced to take over the class. And at the school, mortician school, I guess you'd call it, you usually work there for about 6 or 8 months before they let you into this 1920s looking arena of marble slabs and cadavers. But unthinkingly, he said, "Oh, just follow me." And he motioned me on, and I went in, and I sat there. And there were 5 corpses. And then he called his little group together and wanted to have a little discussion with them, and asked me, "Oh, just go take a look." And I went around, and I noticed that a couple of the corpses were the bodies of people who were street people in their 50s and 60s. But the 2 bodies that interested me the most were 2 young men, one who was 32 and one who was 33. The 32-year-old had died from an overdose of drugs, and the 33-year-old, now this is 1981, looked as though he'd been in a Nazi concentration camp. And he had all these brown purple spots on his body, and I thought, this is really strange looking. At that point, we really didn't know anything about AIDS, and I believe at that point it was called GRID, which was gay immune related deficiency, I guess. So I sat there and I observed what was going on, and they went back and they began to work on this gentleman who had died of AIDS. But as I said, they didn't know, and they didn't have the precautions that they now have. In those days, the city had a contract, or the state had a contract with the mortuary school to pick, the mortuary school was to pick up all the indigent people or anyone who the morticians didn't want to service. And the morticians in San Francisco in 1981 were not servicing people who died from this strange new disease. And when I think back at the way this body was handled, it's frightening because nobody used gloves, nobody used the appropriate precautionary measures. And as I stayed there observing this for several hours, one of the things they did was that they sawed open the skull and removed the brain to have it tested at Stanford. And then they closed up the skull, they washed the hair and washed the body, and used this Eureka fluid to embalm the corpse, stuffed the cheeks with cotton, prepared makeup for the face, and lo and behold, this really tragic-looking cadaver was an incredibly handsome young man. And I was so astonished to see the transformation. I was literally shocked. And the person who was conducting the class all of a sudden realized that I wasn't even supposed to be in there. And he rushed over to see me, and he was amazed that I was still sitting up. He didn't pass out. And I said, "No, but I felt sort of sick." And I did. I had felt rather nauseous at several moments. And then he got this bright idea, "Wouldn't you be interested in becoming a mortician? You'd probably be very good at this." Circumstances moved me into another direction. But I appreciated having my first encounter with AIDS in such a dramatic way, because I became very involved with what was happening, the difficulty that people with AIDS were having in getting any services, the way they were being treated. So it made, it gave me a focus in my disappointment for not being able to serve the Soto Mission in Hawaii. So that was quite exciting. When I came back to Hawaii, and I was married here in Hawaii, and I was married at the Soto Mission, or actually not the Soto Mission, but at the Diamond Sangha. And Aiken Roshi married my husband and myself. And I did not know at the time that we were married. My husband was a hemophiliac, and he didn't know, but within 2 weeks of our marriage, he became very ill. And for the rest of our marriage, he became progressively more ill and died of AIDS. Being a hemophiliac, the gene runs in the female, and it's transferred to the males who get the disease of hemophilia. And shortly thereafter, all the men in his family died within a couple of years. And his mother, who felt so guilty, drank herself to death. So the only person, male left in the family, is his father, who did not, of course, have hemophilia because it was contracted through his mother. And, the questions began coming up where people were talking about, well, it's one thing to serve the people who get the disease that are innocent and the people who are guilty. And it's really important for us to realize, the service providers, that it has nothing to do with how a person gets the disease. The person is ill. They are in desperate need of care. They're in desperate need of love. They're in desperate need of being helped to feel as normal as they can feel under those circumstances. So recently, after my husband died, I realized that I had planned to get a PhD in Buddhist studies at some point, and that was not going to be feasible. So we had moved back to Hawaii, and he died in Hawaii. And the reason for that was that he had grown up in Asia, although he was a Scotsman by birth, Scottish descent, but his father had opened up Reynolds Metals of Asia and was president of Metals of Asia. So my husband grew up between the Philippines and Japan. Anyway, so we came back here, and he died here in Hawaii. And I went back to school, and he didn't want anyone to know he was ill. He was the one who figured out what he had. He was a physicist, and he'd gone to several doctors, and they couldn't tell him what was wrong. And he thought he had allergies. He went to an allergist, and they gave him allergy shots, and he got a little better, and then he got worse. He became allergic to the allergy shots. And then he asked the allergist to do a blood test, which before allergists couldn't read. So my husband took the blood test over to UH. They have a wonderful medical library, and they had the latest books on how to get a blood test. And he came home very excited, telling me that he had either had HIV or AIDS. And that was the scientist in him, that he had discovered the problem, and then, of course, to follow through, he went and was tested. In those days, it was very hard to get tested. When we went together to be tested, they looked at us and said, well, you look like such a nice middle-class couple, and you're older, and, we really don't think. Basically, they didn't want to spend the money to give us the test, but it was very difficult to say no to my husband. So we got our tests, and he was positive, and I was negative, and he was, of course, very grateful for that. Anyway, after he died, I went back to UH, and I got my master's in social work and had the opportunity to do a practicum at hospice, which I adored. It just seems to have been the appropriate work for me. I couldn't be a Buddhist priest here. I could at least be a hospice worker. I worked with hospice for a while, and then I went to the Big Island, and I worked with the AIDS Project in its initial stages. I worked with hospice for a while. And then a few years ago, I was called back and requested to join the Betsuin because the time has come for me to become a priest here in Hawaii to service this community, because the younger generation, for the most part, no longer speaks Japanese, at least not fluently. So after I went back to the university, I received more training in Buddhism from Professor Tanabe. He was a wonderful, wonderful teacher, and Dr. Baroni, from whom you'll hear later, who is a fabulous teacher also, and both of whom, to whom I'm immensely grateful. They've given me many new perspectives on Buddhism that I had not had before entering their classes, although I had studied Buddhism for many, many years. Anyway, I finished my certificate that was required by the Soto Mission and wrote the papers that they needed to submit to the Shumocho in Japan, and went on to take a licensing for being a licensed social worker here in the state, which was an CSW. And then the opportunity opened for me to work at the hospice here, and I was delighted. And I want to tell you about one young man who died of AIDS. I call him Manju, after Manju Bodhisattva. I didn't find out till after he was dead that his family called him Manju after the little cakes that the Japanese people ate when he was small, because he was very chubby. But they let me know this after he was dead, and I would talk about him at my temple, and I would refer to him as Manju because of the issue of confidentiality. When I first met Manju, he was very angry and bitter. He was living in his mother's home with his partner, and he was in despair because his grandmother, when you see him, said, oh, he was evil, that he deserved to die from this disease, he'd done terrible things, and she wouldn't talk to him. And his aunts and uncles wouldn't come and visit him. And his father hadn't seen him in 10 years. And he was just so bitter. So we talked, and he had a leaning toward Buddhism, but he had studied all kinds of religion and was an extremely spiritual person, didn't even realize it. So we decided to start a practice, and he began to meditate. And his meditation was on two things: compassion and wisdom. And what little strength he had, he would get up every day, and he was maybe 65, 70 pounds, and he would get on his walker and he'd walk around the house saying compassion and wisdom, compassion and wisdom. And over a few months, he had absolutely miraculous changes in him. And as he changed, everything around him changed. And his father, who hadn't been in the home for 10 years, came to visit him. Then he decided, we had set up an altar, and every day, every morning he would get up and he would sift his incense, burn a clean, and then light incense and prepare his altar for the day, put the flowers on, light the incense, say his prayers, and meditate. And very slowly he came to terms. Actually, it was not that slowly. Over 3.5 months, came to terms with the fact that he was dying, and really forgave all the members of his family who couldn't bring themselves to open their hearts to him. Anyway, I took very ill and almost died myself when he died, and he had wanted me to do the funeral. And I couldn't even stand up, so his family and I spoke on the phone, which was very hard for me to do, because at that time I had sort of a 3-car collision within me. I had the flu, I had pneumonia, and I had abscessed teeth, and poison was traveling toward my heart and my brain. So I couldn't stand up. But we arranged to have the funeral through hospice. We're an interfaith operation. And a Lutheran minister at hospice, who was our chaplain, did the funeral in a Buddhist setting because Manju wanted to be a Buddhist and had become a Buddhist. And they tell me it was the most wonderful funeral, that there was a professional singer, Hawaiian singer, Mr. Kawakini, who was there, and just spontaneously got up and chanted a Hawaiian chant. People walked away from this funeral saying what a wonderful funeral it was. They had never seen anything like it. And of course, I was sorry to have missed it, but I did have the opportunity later when I was better to do his 49th day service. And since then, I've been working with his family. He died on the 22nd of the month. and in Japan that's the 23rd. While I was sick, he began to appear to me. It was a day after, or the day he died, I had turned on the radio and I was listening to Wagner's Ring Cycle, and then that faded out, and he appeared in front of me. And he appeared as Manjushri on the lion. And I looked at him, and I didn't recognize him at first, and then he smiled. And I said, Scott, Manju, holy heavens, what are you doing here? And he says, I came to see you. And I said, oh? He said, yeah. I said, but I would have thought you would have come as Kanon-sama. And he says, well, Shakti, you always think of Kanon as being female. And he put his hands on his hips and he said in a sassy way, I like the masculine type. So at that point, 1,000 arms of Kanon rose out behind him. And he took me on an incredible journey where I was able to see him. He showed me numerous Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and his spirit jumping in and out, moving from one to the other. And as it would enter one, it would be activated. And then it would leave and activate the next one. So we had a very intimate relationship after his death. And he told me that he was going to return as a monk. And he said he was going to come back not as Monju Bodhisattva, but as Jizo, who is the protector of crossroads and carer of children and the person who, or the Bodhisattva who leads people out of hell. And what I didn't realize is that when we had the ceremonies, he was a very classy guy who wanted Dom Perignon at his 49th day ceremony. So we had these beautiful Chinese ceremonial cups that were carved maybe 150 years ago. And every member of the family received one. And we drank out of these cups, and we had one for him. And each cup was put into a little sacred bag, a handmade pouch. And every 22nd of the month, wherever the family is, no matter where they are in the United States, they synchronize their clocks, and at the time of his death, which was 5:22, they all carry their cups, and they have a toast, and they say prayers for their brother, for their cousin, for her son. And for his son, the father also has a cup and celebrates the life. And people talk about the final stages and they talk about dying, and I really see it slightly differently. I see it as the final stages of living, and that is probably because I'm a follower of Dogen Zenji. But there's life and there's death, and in this transformation, in a sense, we die many times. The baby that we were 40 years ago, for those of you who are at least 40 years old, and the ones of you who didn't exist 40 years ago, you're not the same person at 10, at 20, at 30 as you were as a baby. It's a new person, so there's something different and something the same. And so with life, there's that feeling for me that it's not a question of really death, but a question of transition. And my husband once told me, as a physicist, that they're finding out that the energy in the universe was constant and that nothing was ever gained or lost, but only in a state of flux or change. And that really coincides with the Buddhist belief. And so here I am finally, reaching my 57th birthday, very happily ensconced as a priest at the Soto Mission, very happily ensconced as a hospice social worker, and very happy to be before you today and having the opportunity to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Reverend Khan. We've moved this morning from the theoretical and the conceptual to particular human narratives, and it seems entirely appropriate that we should do so. Unfortunately, given our time constraints, I have a note from powers greater than myself that says that dinner must be served at 12 o'clock sharp. So we're going to have to forgo the formal question session, but you will have the opportunity in informal conversation to talk to our speakers in the second panel. Please join me in thanking Dr. Damon, in thanking Mr. Miyashiro, and in thanking Reverend Khan for their contribution. And last but not least, let me thank the Hongwanji Mission and Reverend Benito for hosting us this morning. Lunch is served.
I'm going to tell them. You're going to slip with them. You don't mind.
What kind of tape are you using?
This is the VHS, this is the high-end one. This is the one that's the best. This one is just more for
Regular tape.
age, yeah, for junkie cards, yeah.
And all take your seats and we'll begin the afternoon session.
Go ahead.
We're going to be looking right at the back from here. So I'm going to go to the side.
Reverend Yoshiaki Fujikami, who is a former bishop of Honganji Mission of Hawaii, now retired, will be the moderator for this afternoon's program. Reverend Fujikami?
I promise to moderate the immoderate in a retiring fashion. Okay, I guess maybe my watch stopped. Is that the right time there? 5 after? Is that early? Okay, right time. We are just a couple of minutes early, but we'll start. Now, this is after lunch, so, there's a danger that we might get a little drowsy, but we'd like to start with a bang, I say, and have a couple of demonstrations of the art of sutra chanting. In our Buddhist tradition, of course, we have the chanting of sutras as part of our ritual. And today we have 2 forms. In fact, they're sort of related. One will be the Honganji, the Jodo Shinshu tradition. The other is Tendai. I say they're similar because it's out of the Tendai tradition that Jodo Shinshu learned a lot of the ritual chants. So there's a relation. Perhaps we could have had some other form of chanting, but we have these 2 different groups represented here. First, we will have Reverend Hiromi Kawaji, who is the Rinbang, or the chief minister here at the Honganji Temple, to chant briefly. He will sort of shorten it. A sutra that is read at our funeral services. We have many sutras, of course, but this that he will read is called Shoshinge, which is technically not a sutra. It's a ge, which is a gata. And it's a gata written not by the Buddha, but this is written by Shinran, the founder of Jodo Shinshu. So technically it's not a gata, but it's used in our rituals. And after that, we will have Reverend Joshin Osuka of the